Okay, so today's screencast is going to be an introduction to moving things around in 3D space. So first thing I'm going to do is open a new project, file new. We're going to stay in the 720 by 486 resolution. Keep our file sizes down. Okay. Remember to go to File and Save. Save to your workspace. Okay. So I'll name this 3D demo. And also remember to collect media. And that keeps all your stuff together in its new place. So I'm going to select my folder and hit save. Okay, so I have my project open. Going to let's open the project pane so we can see our layers. And now what I'd like to start with today is talking about layers and how they relate to 3D and how we start 3D space. So I'm going to add a couple of things here. Let's add some shapes. We have a rectangle. Let's add a circle. Let's change the color of that circle by selecting it there in the library and come over to the inspector. It just makes it a little easier to see. About that. And let's do another rectangle. Let's change the color of that one to about red. Okay, so here we have our three shapes. And if we look in the file browser, or excuse me, the project window, the layers panel, we can see our shapes here, and we can also see how they relate to us in space. So the rectangle, red rectangle's on top, and of course it is it appears in the front in our view there, and then of course the circle, and that is sort of in the middle, and then the blue rectangles on the bottom, and it appears to be behind those. So these are arranged how we're familiar with in 2D space. So what we want to do is we want to convert this to 3D so that we can move objects along the z-axis, which is the axis that moves back and forward in space. So the first thing I can do is I can add a new camera. So when you're working in 3D space, you have to specify your final view, and that's indicated by a camera. So I'm going to hit new camera. Now it's going to give you this pop-up menu. So it says cameras only affect 3D groups. You want to switch your 2D groups to 3D. So right now we're going to say yes, switch to 3D. Okay. And you're going to notice over here we've added a camera layer, and also on our group with our rectangles, it has grouped those together. You'll notice this little symbol here has changed. Now before it was a 2D group and it had these little things next to each other, but it changed to a 3D group and it had these rectangles sort of stacked on top of each other. You'll also notice up here in our workspace we have these new controls that help us control the view. Okay, so we have active camera. If we click on this, you're going to see a whole list of things you can choose from. Camera. We have perspective, front, back, left, right, top, and bottom. This is going to be the hardest part of figuring out kind of 3D is figuring out where you're looking from. So let's change this view to perspective. And you'll notice immediately our view kind of backs up. Now up here on the right area are some controls. Now these allow us to change how we're seeing the scene. So if I hover over, you can see pan camera, orbit camera, and dolly camera. So let's take orbit camera and swing this around. Okay. So now you can kind of see 3D space. It's indicated by this grid, and we have a couple of lines running through that. We have that blue line and a red line. That blue line indicates the z-axis. That's the line that runs kind of depth through space, and the red line indicates x. Now, there's a implied green line here that would be the y-axis. So as I move this around, we're not changing what the final movie would look like. We're just kind of moving this around so we can see what's happening in space. And you can see our camera is here, and it's indicated. Its field of view is indicated by this pyramid. Okay, before I go any farther, let's bring up a new window that we didn't really talk about last time, but I'm sure a lot of you have found by now, and that is the HUD window, or heads-up display. So I'm going to click on the Show HUD, and you're going to see over here it comes up with a couple of controls. Now these controls are generally available in the Inspector tab for most things. But this just allows us to have some control over movement in 3D space pretty easily via these buttons here. So this HUD is always tied to what's selected in the Layers pane or in the Timing pane. So if I click on Camera, we're going to see controls for camera. Now, let's look at these. We have one that goes back and forth in Z space, one that moves left and right, and one that rotates. Okay. So let's look at this one. Now watch the camera as I drag this back and forth and dolly that camera. So this control is controlling that camera along Z space. Swing this camera around, swing our view around. Now we can move this camera right and left here, also up and down. And we can move it backwards and forwards with a little more freedom with this third button here. We can also rotate and scale this camera. Now this applies to any object you have selected. That's a 3D object. It's going to give you these move controls. Okay, so I have the red rectangle selected. Now watch what happens when I drop that back in Z space. Notice it falls behind the other shapes. We change our view back to camera. This is what our final movie would look like. Now, even though our rectangle is on the top in the Layers panel, it is behind in Z space. So it no longer appears in the front. So the relationship between the layer location and where the object appears to the final project has just gotten more complex. Okay, so let's change our view back to perspective. Let's take our objects and move them kind of back in space, and let's take a look at what happens. So I'm going to grab the blue rectangle. I'm going to drop that back fairly far. I'm just rolling the mouse down. Now if I wanted to move it very fast, I would hold the Shift key and drop it down that way. So let me move my circle back a little bit. Okay. Now down, as I hold this down, you can see in the lower right hand corner, you can see the view of the camera. So now that view is going to mirror that camera. And now we can see that our blue rectangle is hardly visible. So true laws of perspective apply here. As you move something back, it gets smaller and changes its relationship to the camera. So we have a couple of views available for us. So this one from perspective, and we can of course move around and kind of see their relationship in space, but we can also sort of define more directly. We can go from the front, which allows us, this is kind of, we're behind the camera here. We can go from the back, left. This allows us to get an overall view of what's available here. And here's our camera. Here's one object there, and there. And of course, right and top, and bottom. So you know, you're going to find that these switching back and forth to these views are very important to kind of keep tabs on what's going on. Okay, another view option that's handy when you're working in 3D space are multiple panes. Okay, so I'm going to hide my projects window so this fills up the whole space. Over here, under our toolbar, you're going to see this button, layout button, on the far right. So if I drop that down, it gives me a list of possible layouts. Now, this becomes handy if you want to kind of keep an eye on what's going on. So I'm going to select the dual pane layout, and notice all of a sudden I've changed into two windows. So I have perspective view and I have a right view, and I can of course change each view according to my needs at the time. So I can change the perspective view. Notice that doesn't actually change the view of the camera. So these are kind of independent. Now if I do wish to change an object over here in perspective, so let's drag him over to the right. He's going to change in both views. So I can get an idea of where he is in our camera view and also where he is in a perspective view at the same time. So you know, you're going to want to use this as you see kind of fit. It does help kind of, once again, keep track of things, which is very important.